I just had this conversation with my co-host yesterday because he was like, who's going to like this? It's just going to be like bro talk or something like that about, obviously real estate. And I told him, I was like, listen, it doesn't matter who likes it. The people that resonate with us will find the message. So that's the exact mindset that we have going into it.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, what's up, podcaster? It is your host, Adam AAA Adams, and I'm stoked because I'm reconnecting with a friend that I met at an event. By the way, one takeaway, just the first takeaway you're going to get from right now is you should probably join a mastermind or mentorship group. There's this mastermind mentorship group that I've been a part of for like 4 years, and my income went from crazy low to crazy high in a few years of just trying to listen to what my coach says. But what's cool about that is he hosts a speaker training every single year. And one of them, because he offers it for a low cost or for free or really low cost to just his members. So I was able to go for like $1. And I met Michael Singletary there as well at the speaker training event. And Michael is just growing his business. He's crushing it. And one of the things that he needs to do is find a way to grow the top of the funnel. So here he is. He's learning how to speak. He's learning better how to speak because we all could learn more each and every day. Doesn't even matter where we are. And additionally, he's like, I'm thinking I've got to have a podcast. So as we record today, Michael has been like already recording episodes. So it's almost ready to launch, which is real cool because hopefully I can approach this with some help that he needs right this second as he's about to launch. And if you are listening and you're going through something similar or about to go through it, or your friend is, maybe you ought to share this episode with them. Maybe you want to share this information so that they don't make any mistakes. Michael, I should tell the listener just a couple things. Your bio's in the show notes because I don't want to read it because that's boring to me. So they can read it if they're not dyslexic to scroll down. The bio's already there. The website to Michael's company is already there. And since he's about to launch, maybe even he'll be launched before this episode is aired. Most likely, the link to his podcast is also in the show notes. So please scroll down, check him out. If you give him a rating or review, an honest rating or review, let him know you heard about him here. I would be honored if you said that. So Michael, I want to ask first and foremost, tell me just about your business. I'm just curious what you do, who you serve. And then I want to bring it into what you're doing with your podcast that's about to launch as well.
Yeah. So, I'm a real estate investor, single family homes, but we have really embraced telecommunications marketing probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And so because of that, data is quite expensive. And I just saw an opportunity to open a data company, just like most entrepreneurs are trying to fill a void, right? Because I was tired of paying so much. And then we launched SkipForce about 4 years ago. So it was a skip tracing company that provides property data and 2 different databases as far as information about the consumer. We're the only platform that has that. We call it Carrier and Credit. Carrier is proprietary to us. And so we've been growing that business, have over 1,000 active users right now. And that's really became more of my passion than actual real estate investing, right? I love talking to real estate investors and diving into their business and seeing how they can execute, especially on the telecommunication side, their marketing campaigns a little bit better. So that's the Cliff Note version for sure.
Cool, man.
Yeah,
so
man.
You found a need, you started it. How did you get 1,000 people to pay you? The listeners thinking to themselves, I'm really excited to kind of learn where Michael is with his podcast because I also want to learn that. But holy hell, he's got 1,000 people paying him every month. Is that right?
Yeah, well, we do have an MRR component, so we don't have 1,000 that is part of our membership. It's probably about 30% of that, right? So 300. The rest of them coming in and out. So we have 2 different pricing plans. Our members obviously have a better pricing plan because they pay a really low monthly fee, about $49. Man, it just grew organically. So, I'm a part of masterminds as well. And I think a lot has to do with just you as a person. I think any business, to me, it literally hurts and pains me if I have a crappy product. And truthfully, whenever we first started this data thing, I knew nothing about how to run a data company. So there's a lot of mistakes along the way. But you just take ownership of it and then you just try to constantly improve the product. And I think that's just how it evolved.
How do you market it though? How do you get it in front of 1,000 people? Like, is it all word of mouth or?
No, I think it's probably about 50 to 60% word of mouth. We run a lot of cold traffic, although it's becoming increasingly more difficult, truthfully. So we have a marketing team. So there's really 2 guys on our team that's what they do full time and trying to get the message out. I got to tell you, I mean, just being a little bit vulnerable here, my public speaking, especially a couple of years ago, was always my biggest fear. So that's why I went to Sean's thing, McCluskey's thing, right? I mean, it was my biggest fear. Even whenever I went through, the podcast tours and going on podcasts, it was so much more uncomfortable than it is right now. Yeah. And so just creating that content, I don't think I was ready, but now I feel comfortable within myself and within the space to be able to take that leap.
Yeah. I think I want to share 2 quick things for the listener. Now, Michael's saying speaking wasn't always his thing. He was always afraid of it. So I've got 2 pieces of advice. One of them is about flexing muscles, exercising certain muscles that make you better at them. You got to do them. Michael and I were talking about my health journey and like calories right before we started recording. I've got this trainer that I've been hiring for ever since it's probably like 8 months. It's worked remarkably well. But a couple things is every 6 weeks, he switches my workout on me. So every 6 weeks, I get a totally different thing. And it's always harder than the last time. But after about 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, you're used to all of those new movements. He had me doing weighted lunges. Now, lunges suck. They burn up your butt. They burn up your hamstrings. They're just horrible. And then he was like, put on weight. Do as much weight. You're like wobbling, right? You cannot hardly stand up. Your quads hurt. Your hams hurt. Your butt hurts. And it's like you're getting Charlie horses. It's physical pain. You're wondering if you should even go on anymore. And it's crazy every time he switches it up. But after some reps, the next week and the third week, it starts to feel a little bit better. And that's like with our podcast. So first and foremost, podcasting is scary. Putting ourselves out there is scary. Being a public speaker is scary. Being on other people's shows is scary. But if we flex that muscle, yes, it's uncomfortable the first time. It's uncomfortable the second time. It might even be a little painful. But we're going to get used to it. We're going to get stronger. And then on the 6th week of this last one, it was like I'm doing these lunges with the heavy weight. And I'm just like going down and back up and going down and back up. And I'm like, what the hell's happening? I'm so freaking strong. And then he switched it on me again. And now I'm doing like insane amounts of deadlifts and hamstring curls. And I'm like, my hamstrings cannot stand this. So I couldn't even do all of the reps. But I went out there, I put it in, I'm getting the exercise, and I'm going to get used to it. And then I'm going to crush it. I'm going to look better, and I'm going to feel better, and I'm going to be way stronger. But I couldn't do that without putting in the reps. So you're listening and you're thinking to yourself, like, what did Michael do to kind of get over this? Well, one of the things he freaking just put in the reps. Yeah. He just got it. He did a podcast tour. He went to a coaching for speaking on stage. He put himself out there. He practices it. He tries it. Now he's feeling like real comfortable enough to go to that next thing. Right. He's going from lunges now to the deadlifts. Heavy, right? So he was on other people's podcasts, and now he's launching his own podcast. He's going to actually be the star of his show. How uncomfortable can that feel? It's got to be crazy, but he's doing it, and then he's putting in the reps. The other thing that I want to share is a piece of feedback that I don't think Michael needs, but you who's listening might need this. I am dyslexic. I'm ADD. I don't think I'm the most eloquent person at all. And I remember I always have these memories of getting made fun of when I was like in kindergarten. Like kindergarten is what holds me back from everything. And so I've become a shy person. My listener probably doesn't always think that I'm shy because they're used to somebody who's put in the reps. But I was very like timid, shy, afraid. I don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to get made fun of. If I am myself, then people are going to know who I am, and then I could be judged for who I am. So I'm going to be somebody else. I'm going to pretend. I'm going to do this. And it was really challenging when I started my first podcast. Now I put in over 850 reps so far. 850 over the last like 4 or 5 years. Content, 850 different episodes, 850 different conversations with other entrepreneurs, pouring into my listener, trying to add value. And I still don't think I'm that great. I still get what they call impostor syndrome. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I'm hosting the podcast on podcasting. I have the gall to like launch this podcast. And there are many podcasters that are better than me. Many that have millions more subscribers. But I have this. And it's like, who am I to say that? And then I also realize, hey, I might be too long-winded. I might give too many details. I might not be as eloquent as the last person. I'm not as well-spoken as the other podcaster. I'm not as smart with books because I never read a book. I don't want to read a book. And so like I have all this stuff holding me back, and it makes it real hard to have a podcast. So the takeaway here is, what does Adam do that helps him to be able to still put out content even when he has imposter syndrome? Even when he's done 850, how does he still feel this way? And I want to share, there's 2 ways to think about putting out content. Number 1 is, what do people think of me? How do I sound right now? And when you're self-reflecting like that, your content is shit. It's not helping anyone. Other way to do it. Who is my avatar? Who's my listener? What do they need? What are they going through? How can I help them? How can I serve them? And then you change it from getting inside your head of needing to be perfect. And then you're getting inside your heart of needing to show and give that real actual value. You're outwardly focused. Something divine happens. I don't care if you believe in God or the universe or something else or nothing at all. I'm saying something divine happens when you get out of your own head and you start adding value to the person that you believe you need to add value to. Get connected somehow. And then you're speaking, even though I'm still not eloquent, even though I'm still not well-spoken, even though I'm still not smart, even though I still feel self-conscious, I know that when I'm thinking about the right person, I'm going to be able to add value to the right person. I think that's super important, like for anyone who's listening, to switch it from thinking about themselves to thinking about their listener.
I think that's gold. It's funny because we share a very similar background to a certain degree. So English is not my first language. It's my only language now, and I can't even speak it well. Right. So I was born overseas.
I wouldn't have guessed that, bro.
I failed kindergarten. I don't know how that happens, but I failed kindergarten. Right. So
you failed kindergarten.
Right. Because I went to an expat school and I could only speak Vietnamese. I'm half Vietnamese. Right. And so I stutter, I stammer, I could barely speak proper English. I'm more slang based. So that really was the thing that held me back, a lot of it, right? I mean, and I just had this conversation with my co-host yesterday because he was like, who's going to like this? It's just going to be like bro talk or something like that about, obviously real estate. And I told him, I was like, listen, it doesn't matter who likes it. The people that resonate with us will find the message. The other people that do not, we can never add value to them anyway. So that's the exact mindset that we have going into it.
Awesome, man. I asked you for your permission,
of course,
to coach you on your sound quality in the middle of this recording. And you said, I'm an open book. I'm good with that. Yes, do it.
Please.
So I'm hearing echoes.
Okay.
I'm not sure what it is. I'm trying to think, like, it looks like you're using a great mic stand, boom arm. It looks like you're using an expensive microphone that is exactly what you need. But what I'm hearing is a couple of pops, small pops, every now and again. Hard to find. Maybe the listener still hasn't heard it. But I'm hearing a couple of pops. And then the other thing is that I'm hearing a lot of reverb. And so I'm thinking about what kind of room you might be in. I see that a giant TV right behind you. That's non-porous. Of course, something's going to bounce off that. But I'm curious if you got a whole bunch of windows, if you got bare floors, if you got bare ceilings, if you got bare walls. What kind of room are you in?
I do. So I'm in my office, essentially, completely virtual, and I work from home now. So my office is like literally my desk and everything's over here, and my studio is right here. I'm going through Rodecaster Pro, and I'm not 100% how to use this. So I don't know if the settings may be wrong, right? Cool. Or maybe I need to put some paddings on the wall so that the sound doesn't bounce off.
Tell me the exact mic that you're using. Let me look it up and see if it's condenser or dynamic.
A Rode mic. I don't know the exact.
Is it the Rode Pod mic?
It's a pod mic, yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's a dynamic. I swear it is. Yep, it's a dynamic mic. Okay, and that looks like the right one. So, and it was about $100?
Yeah, something like that. So,
Okay.
and it works
So that's
really
a
well with
great mic.
Rodecaster, supposedly. I don't know.
Here's what I want you to do. I want you to look at your Rodecaster Pro that your Rode Pod mic is hooked into.
Okay.
And what I want you to check is where the XLR cable hooks into the back. Whichever one, that might be on number 1. Okay. Is it on number 1?
It is on number 1.
Okay, tell me where your slider is, your volume slider for that track.
It's on the 3rd level.
Okay, so it's 30% volume.
Correct.
What?
That's what it said. Yeah. I mean, I can move it up. Does that sound louder?
It is louder.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's at 30%.
It's at 30% right now. Is that where it's supposed to be?
Okay. I want you to do 2 things.
Okay.
For me, the listener, they're going to need to troubleshoot this on their own. They can't just like go off of Michael's settings. I keep mine at 40%.
Okay.
40% is right for me. I think you need to do 2 things, Michael, because of the room that you're in, because you got all these echoey parts. So you got to do 2 things. Number 1 is I want you to eat the mic. I hope you're hungry. Eat the mic. Move it in so it's almost touching your chin. Before you do anything, I need you to pull, because of the volume on yours, I need you to pull that slider from, you said 30%. I want to hear it at 20%. I want the mic to be close to you, but I want the gain to be turned down to 20%.
How's that sound?
It sounds amazing.
Awesome.
It sounds so freaking good. So
what
we did for you is we brought your dynamic mic, so it's not going to hear the echo and reverb anymore from the walls and ceilings and TVs and windows. And we also made it so you're right next to that bubble. Yeah. And your mic has a built-in, what they call a noise gate. A noise gate is basically going to say what's allowed in and what's not allowed in. And by you getting closer to the mic, it automatically changes that noise gate so that it only hears what's right next to you instead of hearing all the echo and reverb. So you've already corrected it by turning the gain down a little bit and moving the mic right next to your mouth instead of, what was it, like 10 inches before? Away?
Yeah, it was a little bit further away. I got to get used to this because it's kind of weird being right here.
It's sounding so good, though. That's step 1 is let's make sure you sound good and you sound excellent. Now, have you recorded some podcast episodes already? Like, are they ready to be published?
We've recorded several, but we've changed the concept by adding a couple of hosts. We're going to have to redo things. And
okay.
We want to get about 10 episodes up before we start, publishing. I don't know if that's right or not.
All right. What questions did you have prepared for me today, Michael?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, a couple of things, right? What's the best cadence as far as how many times should we publish? It should be every week, twice a week, once every couple of weeks.
I'm going to start with a story. I'm going to start with a story. I was in the real estate space for a long time. I've been investing in real estate since 2005. And in 2016, 17, 18, 19, I was a fairly big influencer in the real estate space. And so I got to speak on tons of stages. It was such an honor and a privilege. And I was so proud to be jumping on some of these stages. One of those stages was Joe Fairless's. Joe has a daily podcast. And there was this woman. I was backstage and I was having to follow Joe. I had to be the person after Joe, which sucks. I don't know why they put me there. Because I'm like this peon compared to him, what was that hashtag impostor syndrome? So I'm like this peon compared to him. He's speaking on stage and I'm like getting ready. And of course I got the nervous sweats. My pits are like horrible. And it goes to Q&A and I'm glad that it's at Q&A, but it's making me sweat more as I'm stressed. And this lady raises her hand and I'm seeing her from backstage because she's like right in the front, right next to Joe. And she ask all smug. Like she basically already knows that Joe is going to say the answer, nope, I wouldn't do it. It's too hard. That's what she's assuming. So he raises her hand. She says, Joe, if you had to do it all over again, would you still do a daily podcast? A once a day show? And Joe thinks about it for about 2 seconds. It didn't take him long. And his answer was no, I wouldn't do a once a day podcast. But he followed it up with something that nobody would have expected. He said, if I did it all over again, I would do a twice a day podcast.
Oh my
Now
God.
you're basically hearing everybody be like, oh, like, what the hell? Like, why would he do that? And so he answers a couple of questions. So this is to answer Michael's question about what's the right cadence? How frequently should I publish an episode? So in Joe Fairless's experience, and he's one of the top podcasters in all podcasts, but certainly real estate investing. So he says, no, I would do a twice a day podcast instead. And now everybody's like surprised. And he follows it up with, when you have somebody on your podcast, they are going to hear your podcast. They're going to know about your podcast. His whole thing and how he's making so much money and raising so much private capital, he literally owns like $2 billion of assets.
Right.
The highest I ever got was 100 million. He is at like $2 billion in assets. It's insane how much they're running, but it's made it easier because of his podcast being a daily podcast. And he thinks it would be even better if he did a twice a day podcast. Why? It's because of all of these additional conversations. So he has 4 brand new conversations published every single week. And then on Follow Along Friday, that's his once a week Friday episode, where he, at the time that I was listening, he may have changed things over time, but Theo Hicks and Joe would just talk about what's happening in their own business. Like, they're moving. I'm moving to this one place. I'm starting a meetup to attract capital. I just got engaged. It's so exciting. Hey, my wife's having a baby. It's so exciting. Hey, she's born and she's the most precious thing ever. And I'm still not getting any sleep. All of the things about Follow Along Friday are what's happening in Theo and Joe's actual business and life. That was an important part. 4 brand new conversations with new people that have never had a conversation with him. A Follow Along Friday where his listener can know exactly who he is and how he is, which grows and strengthens the KLT blueprint, know, like, trust, because people get to know him, like him, and trust him because they know who he is, what he's about, what he's going through, and what his business is going through. So that was a good part of his whole program. And then on Saturdays and Sundays, he did something like, I don't remember what they're called, Situation Saturday, maybe. And there's another one that's like Something Sunday. Whereas he brings back one of those 4 people that were brand new, and they do a separate interview. And he will what they call call back. Write this down, everybody. Call back. What is a callback? A callback is when you mention to your listener that you had another episode that was helpful. That's called a callback. And so Joe would constantly on Saturdays and Sundays have a situation that he goes through with a previous guest on the podcast. And then they would go through a situation like I was on his podcast for a situation Saturday or situation Sunday. And the situation that I expressed was, and this was like 2 years after my first episode. So I think my first episode was like 1,300. And now he's at like 3,000, right? He's much higher. And so here I come back on Situation Saturday, I think, and I'm talking about how I almost business partnered in with this random guy that had a securities violation. And I had raised all of the money. We had raised a couple of $1 million to join in on a business. And my company stood to make $230,000. And at the very end, one of my passive investors who listened to my own podcast, they heard that they're supposed to do their due diligence on the operators. And so my own person came in, listened to my podcast, and did due diligence on all of the general partnership of this apartment building that we were going to buy. It was like a $20 million apartment building, and I was going to own like this tiny fraction by raising $2 million of the dollars, right? And my passive investor found out that one of those guys had a securities violation, is not allowed to raise money, and is not allowed to do anything because of this past violation. And so I'm embarrassed. My listener says, I'm pulling out, and we had raised like 2 million. Most of the money came from that one guy that was a listener. So he's like, I'm pulling out. So that I didn't know what to do. And so we ended up completely leaving, and we lost a crazy amount of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I share this on Joe's podcast. And then what he does while I'm being recorded on that is he calls back to the old one that was like a year and a half or 2 years before. And so now the listener's going to hear this compelling story about this person who almost partnered with the wrong person, and then is going to get curious about one of these other episodes. All right. So Joe has all of this value where he's got these 4 new people, he's got his solo, and he's got these 2 where he invites his guest back. And that's helping him to be able to grow his business. That's helping him to be able to connect with more people, have more conversations with more people, give more exposure. On the first 4, one of the special things that he does is make sure that those 4, he tries his best. It doesn't always happen. He tries his best that those 4 people have never been on a podcast before. Write that down because it's actually important. Why does it matter that those people have never been on a podcast before? It matters because they're more likely to share the episode. When you get these people that have been like Michael, when you get Michael on your podcast, Michael, I could be completely wrong, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say, when you did your podcast tour, you didn't promote every single one of those.
Probably not.
It was too many for you because you were on so many.
Sucked.
You might have done a couple. Yeah. You might have done the first few. You might have done, then you're going to spot check and only do the ones that you're like really proud of, but you're not going to share all of them. Well, that's the same thing that Joe was going through. He realized that he needed these 4 people. He wanted as many as possible that they have never been on a show before. And so he had his teammate go into all of these different Facebook groups and follow along, like not follow along Friday, but go into the Facebook group and see who's posting, see what they're talking about, see how many deals they've done. And then he asks them to come on Joe's podcast. He does his own research, his preliminary research on these people, and finds out if they've ever been on another podcast. And if they haven't, and he believes that they could add value and they're coming from a real place and they have ethics and morals, he invites them to come on the show, and they're more likely to share the podcast. And because of this whole process, Joe Farrell's podcast got to be one of the biggest, best podcasts out there. But he still realized that if he would double the content, double the amount of the conversations, double the amount of being personal and connecting with the audience, double the amount of people coming back to his podcast again, adding more value, not only is he having more shareable content, this is for the listener to have more value. Another thing is he's being pushed up front and center, top front, SEO, search engine optimization. And check it out, because his podcast is being published once a day, or even if he changed it twice a day, because it's being published twice a day, he's on the first page of Google twice every single day. Now, you've got all these other people that publish once a week. So on Monday, what's going to happen for just their followers? On Monday, or whatever day it's published, it gets pushed up. And so it kind of, for a minute, it's front and center, top left. For a minute, and if your listener is scrolling through their podcast app on the exact moment that you are first and foremost, you're on the top page of Google, they don't have to scroll. You're more likely to get listened to by them, by your own listener who's already subscribed. So if you are only publishing once a week, it only happens one time in the whole week. And already on Tuesday, you're pushed down the second page of Google. On Wednesday, you're on third page of Google. For Thursday, you're on the fourth page. Friday, they couldn't find you if they wanted to. They wouldn't be able to find your podcast because there's too many other people that are published also on Monday after you, also on Tuesday, also on Wednesday, and also on Thursday. So on Friday, you try to publish. On Friday, they try to listen to a podcast. They're not going to find you anymore. So Joe found a way to hack that. Every single day, he's front page of Google. First, top left, always showing up every single day. And it would be even better for him if he showed up twice in a day. So at midnight, for example, he's already up the top page of Google. And then halfway through the day, let's call it noon, he's back at the top page. And so no, it doesn't matter when somebody who subscribed to his podcast goes and checks out podcasts. Joe is always first, top left, above and beyond anyone else. So he gets what's called the grease, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And he's the squeaky wheel because he's publishing more content than anyone else. constantly in front of the people, constantly making them to think about him as the go-to for that content. So
Does
when
it
you
matter
ask
on duration, so some of them
the
it's
length
probably a
of the
longer,
episode,
like,
you mean?
Yeah.
Let me answer duration of episodes right after this and see, we'll talk about if it matters or not.
Fair.
So Joe does 20-minute episodes. I love how he could do that. I can't do that. I cannot do that. He jumps in, he asks like 3 or 4 questions. And then he basically says, what's your best advice ever? And then he says, we're going to come back after this messages. And then he asks some rapid fire round. And the whole thing gets done in 20, 25 minutes. So he blocks out a 30-minute thing and he just jumps in and gets it all done. I want to go back to cadence. My belief is my own clients, we will not even serve you because we're assholes. We won't even serve you. We won't even look at you if you're not going to publish at least 1 episode per week. You know why? Because you're going to fail. You're definitely going to fail. And then my name is attached to your name as I'm a failure too. I don't want to fail. So I only work with people if they do at least weekly episodes, 4.333 episodes a month.
Right.
Always and consistent. But what's better than that? 2 episodes a week is better than 1. It's more than double. There's this synergistic thing. You know how it's like 1 + 1 = 3? Well, 2 episodes a week isn't the equivalent of 2 episodes a week. It has some type of exponential growth because of the additional content and everything we already talked about, where you have more shareable content, where you're on the first page of Google more often, well, the first page of Apple more often, to put it more directly, the first page of Apple more often. And you're also going to have more conversations with people, and they will talk to their people who share it with their people. And so you actually grow much, much faster. What's better than 2? Take a guess. 3. So what we do in my company is if somebody wants to be a top 1% podcast, if that's their goal, we have a money back promise. Like if we don't get you to this level, we give you 20 grand. So we're going to do it, or you're going to have $20,000, right? Both are good. Either I'm at 1% or I get 20 grand. I will just say we haven't yet had to give $20,000 to somebody because we crush it. We crush it at what we do. So we get all those clients at top 1%. And so I'm trying to think where I'm going with this. Give me just a second.
It's okay.
So what we need to do is help those people to be able to be at top 1%. And what's one of the easiest ways to guarantee that? It's a cadence of 3 episodes a week. That's where I was going with it. If our client is going to do 3 episodes a week, it's extremely easy for me to get you a top 1%. I still will add fuel to fire. I will still do marketing and growth, and I will still do email all of your guests for you and give them promotional images. I will still do all these things, but I'm so freaking confident if you are doing 3 episodes a week, you're going to be in top 1% for sure. And then we have another level that's a top 10% client. And the minimum I let them do is 2 a week. So if you want to be in top 10%, you're probably going to achieve it all automatically, even without our help, if you do at least 2 a week. There's a high probability that you'll be able to achieve that top 10% status just simply by putting out twice the content as the average person. And then we have a third tier, the lowest tier. It has no promise, no guarantee, no money back, anything. It just means you'll have a podcast. And that is a 1 episode a week. You have to at least commit to 1 episode per week. We don't have anything smaller. So the best cadence, I would say, is 14 a week based on what Joe Fairless would reply. And there's a lot of reasons we already shared. But the absolute minimum, if you want to be top 1% podcast, 3 a week. Absolute minimum, if you want to be top 10% podcast, 2 a week. And I'm just saying and pouring into the listener right now, and you, Michael, you don't want to be less than top 10%. I promise. You definitely don't want. So I hope that I can convince you to do 2 a week or more. And then what's the length, the duration of each and every episode? It doesn't matter. I've looked at all of the data, all of the stats. There are extremely popular podcasts that are 3.5 hour long podcasts. There are other podcasts that are very valuable, serve their audience, and get a ton of traction that are 5-minute episodes. And there's a lot of people that pretend to know, but they don't know shit. They try to tell you that it has to be 25 minutes long. They bring up this evidence that the average commute is 30 minutes. And so you need it to be slightly under that. so that people can listen to the whole thing. Bogus information. Don't ever think that you need to lengthen your podcast because Joe Rogan has a 3.5-hour podcast and he's popular. So I've got to somehow lengthen my podcast and make it 3.5 hours, even though it's boring, even though I don't have good content. And even though I've already ran out of things to say on that episode. And so we're just trying to fill time because it works for Joe. I need to be 3.5 hours. So I'm just going to fill the time with shit. And also don't think that you need to shorten the episode and be like those people that are getting value out of 5 minutes. Don't you dare try to have a podcast and then cut out the actual value that you have. You have something, you have details and takeaways that your listener, your perfect avatar needs. They need this stuff. They can't take the next step. And if they need this value to take the next step, and you have this mindset that it needs to be short, and so you cut out real value just to shorten it to 5 minutes or 25 minutes or any other number, then what's going to happen is you're going to be having episodes that lack value. And if the episode lacks value, then nobody wants to listen because you thought you needed to shorten it. So the real answer is it doesn't matter how long it is, as long as you have a couple things that happen. One of those is the whole episode should be value. I was just coaching some of our clients that just started with us. They've already had a podcast, and I'm listening to their podcast. It was yesterday. Listening to their podcast, and the beginning of it goes like this. They've got this really exciting music, like really cool music. It has an energy that you want to follow, for sure. The energy in the music is awesome. And then they've got this voiceover artist that comes in, and they're a professional, so of course they're going to be pretty good. They got this voiceover artist that comes in with like a level 7 out of 10 energy, and 5 is average, and 6 is above average, and that's where you want to start. 7 is awesome, perfect for a voiceover artist. And then when you get to like the 8s, 9s, and 10s, it starts to get annoying. It starts to get like feeling fake, like you're just pretending to be a certain way. So the voiceover artist was perfect, right on point at a 7 out of 10, where the music was just legit as well. And so all this energy is happening. And then this is what happens. You got these two guys co-hosting, and their energy is at a 3 and 4 out of 10. And so it lets you down. It gives you an underwhelming feeling. Like you're climaxing. Let's say you're in bed with your person. You're about to climax, and then it just drops. It just completely drops off. This is what it felt like in the beginning of this podcast. It was getting excited. Oh, I love this music. My energy is getting pumped up. This voiceover artist is on point. And then the two guys come in like this. Well, hey, welcome back to the podcast. Hey man, how was your weekend? Oh, my weekend is pretty good. How about yours? Oh, I had a good weekend. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I just kind of played with my kids, and it was kind of fun. And hey, like, what are you going to do this week? Well, we're going to do this. And it's like this banter that nobody gives a shit about at all. It doesn't help the listener, move the listener closer to their goals. The energy is so underwhelming. You'll lose your climax. You're just like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I can't. And these two gentlemen had this banter go on for so effing long that the listener is like angry, and they're turning it off. They're turned off, and they're going to turn you off now. They're done. You've lost them completely. I coached them to do a couple of things. Think about your listener, WIIFM. That's everyone's favorite radio station. What's in it for me? These guys come in and they're just talking about their weekend, whatever else, like boring stuff. The listener doesn't care about that. The listener, unfortunately, is a selfish asshole who only cares about themselves. That's all the listener cares about. They want to know, why are they here? What's in it for me? What are they going to learn? Why are they listening to this podcast? They don't care about your weekend. Your weekend, it's irrelevant 10 years from now. Who cares? What's in it for me? You got to come in and tell the listener what they're going to gain. So today, on this episode, I'm talking, hey, Michael and I are going to have a great conversation. What's really cool is Michael is almost about to launch his podcast. So if you are almost about to launch your podcast, this podcast episode is going to be for you. And if you know somebody, don't let them miss out on this value. Please share it with them. You're in for a treat, right? So that's what the first thing that I say. I'm not asking you about your day, your weekend, your month, your year, your kids. I care about that. Michael, I care about you, man. But my listener doesn't give a shit. They don't care. They care about themselves. And so we got to give them a big promise in the very beginning. What are you going to get out of this episode? Why are you here? After we give a big promise, what do we have to deliver on the promise? We say, you're going to get value. And then we give value. And then at the end, we might wrap it up and say, you got value. And this is what you should do about it. Give them a CTA, a call to action. So if you, on the length of your episode, if it's 5 minutes, cool. If it's 25, 35 minutes, cool. If it's 1 hour, 2 hours, 3.5 hours, that's fine. As long as it's entertaining and valuable, educational. If they're getting these takeaways, if they're entertained, if they're having fun, if they're getting actual value that they can use to be a better real estate investor, to be able to utilize Skip Force as a service to skip trace for them, as with these 1,000 other members, other subscribers, then they're going to be able to take that action. The length of it just needs to be enough to do those things. No more, no less. Cool?
Right. Yeah, absolutely, man. I want to respect your time because I got questions, right? But
let's do it.
I want to respect your time. So how much time do we have?
We got about 10 minutes. Let's do about 5-10 minutes. So 2-ish questions.
Awesome, man. So what are the biggest, what are the challenges that you did not foresee when you started this journey? And then you look back and go, okay, well, gosh, I didn't know that was coming.
One of the biggest ones is I was thinking to myself that Apple was so excited that Adam Adams was starting a podcast. I made the wrong assumption that Apple was waiting for me to start this podcast. You know why? Because I watched a movie called Field of Dreams. And they say if you build it, they will come. And I believed in that shit. I'm just going to build it and they'll just come. I'm going to be a freaking famous person just because I have a podcast. Apple's going to be so giddy. They've been waiting for me to do it. So mistake number one that I wish I didn't do is I never marketed my podcast. I believed Apple would do it for me. So I ended up swimming upstream. It was real hard. I was out of breath, right? I wasn't really moving. It was a treadmill of water and I was about to drown because I believed Apple would just promote me instead of I had to promote me. And so one of the things that I've differently on my second podcast, which is currently ranking top 0.5%, we promise our clients top 1% if they're doing that. I'm at top 0.5, double the top 1%, right? And have a lot more listeners than the average 1% podcast. Why? Is because I didn't wait for Apple to promote me. I promoted me. I just had another podcast episode where we talked about adding fuel to the fire, getting from, I think I said on that call, getting from Miami, Florida to, I think I said wine country, Sonoma Valley to get some Pinot Noir, right? Mm-hmm. And with that said, I could never get from there to there without the gas. I could have the plan. I could have the roadmap. I could have everything outlined. I could ask the right questions to my guest. I could have the perfect guest, but I'm not going to add any fuel to the fire. I'm not going to get anywhere. And so the big takeaway is don't expect Apple to just be excited that you launch. Most podcasters fail. They're going to expect that you fail. You've got to do something in order to be able to trigger some algorithms. In this case, it's you've got to take control of the marketing. You've got to pay somebody else to do it, or you got to do it yourself. But if you're not marketing, you're not going to get any gas. So that's the big one that I did. And the second one, I really hope that the listener doesn't do. I hope that you don't do too, Michael. I knew who my avatar was. It sounds insane because I'm going to contradict myself. I knew who I wanted to attract, but I wasn't focused. And basically what I was doing wasn't congruent with my goals. So for me, I wanted to raise private capital. I was what they call a syndicator who buys these larger apartment buildings, but with other people's money. And so my goal is I want to raise other people's money. And so my thought is I have a podcast. I'm automatically famous. Apple puts me in front of people. Everybody just naturally wants to invest with me because I'm the shit. And my life is easy. But here's the thing. If you want to raise private capital, who do you need to attract? You have to attract rich people. And I was the idiot, and I don't want the listener to do this. That's why I'm sharing my problem here. Also because Michael asked me to be vulnerable, but I'm sharing my problem here. I knew what I wanted to achieve. I began with the end in mind. I knew who my avatar was, a rich person, but it wasn't consistent with what I was actually putting out. My podcast was called Creative Real Estate Podcast. So who does creative real estate attract? A poor person. Exactly. I was attracting somebody because all I knew was how do you buy deals without money? Because that's all I did is I bought deals in 2005, in 2008, in 2011, 2015. I bought deals with other people's money. I was really good at it. I grew a huge portfolio with basically only putting 150,000 of my own money. Out of $100 million of real estate, I put 150 grand. That's insane.
Right.
You would normally have to put like $30 million of your own money to close on that same. And I did 150 grand. So I knew how to help people. I knew how to inspire people to be able to make money without money, to be able to jump in, raise other people's money, and be able to help other people see an opportunity. But the problem was my perfect listener wasn't listening, because the rich engineer the Indian engineer who has $1 million ready to deploy into these things doesn't scroll through Apple and see creative real estate. Oh, that's perfect for me. I got all this money. I need that. I'm going to click on it. So basically saying I missed the boat completely. I knew what I wanted to achieve, but I wasn't focused on it. I didn't actually make it happen. And a lot of people do that. I want to give you an example of a different syndicator that does that. They start a podcast about syndication, about raising capital. And their goal is, I want to raise private capital. I want to raise money. I want people to put their money with me. And then what they do is they bring on guests that are other operators. And then they ask them questions like, how did you find a deal? They ask them questions like, how did you raise the money? Well, I'm sorry, but somebody who's a passive investor, a limited partner, that doesn't help them. That doesn't make them be able to put their capital with other people. You got to have other passive investors. You have to have other passive investors. You have to ask them, why did they become a passive investor? Was it hard for them to become a passive investor? How much did they put in their first deal? How many deals have they done so far? How much money are they making passively every single month? Because they started doing that 3 years ago. You have to ask questions like, how did you vet your operator? How did you know that this was a good opportunity? You got to ask questions like, to become a passive investor, what were you worried about? You don't ask questions like, how did you find the deal? How did you raise the money? No passive investor cares about that stuff. So they're missing the mark. They know what they want. They know who their avatar is. They began with the end in mind. They're just missing the point by accidentally interviewing the wrong person, asking the wrong questions, giving the wrong content. And what ends up happening is no man can serve two masters. Most of us have heard that. No man can serve two masters. I can't both eat like I want to eat and look like I want to look. I can't do both. And with my podcast, I can't serve a passive investor and serve an active investor at the same time. If I'm actually serving the active investor, the passive investor that I want is going to listen and say, well, this isn't for me. And they're going to go somewhere else. And if I'm doing it half and half, if I'm half-assing two things instead of full-assing something, if I've got content, some content for passive and some content for active, for example, both of those masters, both of those listeners, both of those avatars that are different, completely different, will say, this podcast isn't really for me. And so what ends up happening when you try to be everything for everybody, you're not niched, you're not focused, you're feeling the fear of missing out. You're feeling the feeling of, I've got to help this person and this person. Or you're even just feeling the feeling of, I can help this person and this person. But then you put out this content that half of it serves one, half of it serves the other. The passive's like, this isn't for me. Some of it is, but I can find a better one that's really focused. And the active investor's like, this isn't really for me. Some of it is, but I can find a better one that's just for me. And so both people leave. You're thinking that you're opening up your sales to having more wind, but really you're closing off your sales. You're putting your sale completely down and you're getting no traction because you're trying to serve both people. And I think a lot of people make that mistake, and I certainly did. On this podcast, I don't make that mistake, bro. Everything that I say, every detail, everything that I share, it's exactly for my right avatar.
Got it.
Every guest that I have, every question that you have, every way that I put it in, every example that I share, it's to help that person go from where they are to where they need to be. And in many cases, that means they hire our company, they work with our company. And now I'm supporting them one-on-one to be able to help them get that goal. And we make money too. You got to be focused. You got to be intentional. That's the word of the day. You got to be intentional with your content, your guests, your questions, your feedback, your illustrations, your analogies. They all got to be intentional on your perfect avatar. You can't just know who you want to achieve and do whatever the hell you want. Know what you want to achieve and then be intentional behind it.
Awesome, my friend. Great stuff. I really appreciate that. Appreciate your time too.
Back at you, bro. And as soon as your podcast is up and running, give me the link. It's going to be in the show notes. And for you who's listening, every other episode is just me pouring into you. I want to pour into you. And I've created something that I think you're going to really love. It's right on the next episode. I'll see you there. If you're glad that you checked out the podcast today, if you got some value out of this episode, some actionable takeaways, I invite you to do one of three things. A, you could do a written review on Apple. Let us know what you think. Just an honest written review. B, you could share the podcast with a friend of yours who needs it. Or C, at the very least, implement what you've learned to take your business and your podcast to the next level. And I'll see you on the next episode.